Palestinians are calling for action as Israel continues to bar young Muslims from praying at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Are Israel's restrictions a recipe for renewed violence? Can tensions at the Al-Aqsa Mosque be contained? And why is this site so important to Muslims and Jews? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fawzia Ibrahim. Well, it's one of Islam's holiest sites, the compound in Jerusalem that includes Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's also home to one of the world's great architectural sites, the Dome of the Rock. Now, the area has long been a flashpoint between Palestinians and Israelis. It also houses the Temple Mount, one of the holiest sites in Judaism. Well, for the last 3 weeks, Israeli police have prevented Palestinians from praying at Al-Aqsa Mosque, and in recent months, Jewish settlers have forced their way into the complex, occasionally triggering violent confrontations. The Palestinian president has called those confrontations a desecration. Now, before we bring in our guests, Nisreen Al-Shamaileh sets up our discussion from the occupied West Bank.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has not kept quiet about what he describes as Israeli violations in Jerusalem, especially in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. On Friday, he said the site was being desecrated by Jewish settlers. And the next day, at the start of the Fatah Revolutionary Council's meeting in Ramallah, Abbas warned of continued Israeli attempts to divide Islam's third holiest site.
الموجودين في الحرم.
Assault and abuse by Israeli settlers is escalating in Jerusalem with the purpose to divide the city. We should stand our ground, not to allow the Israeli settlers to desecrate the holy mosque, and we're in the process of taking legal action.
There have been scuffles and tensions at almost every gate around the Al-Aqsa compound as Israel tries to limit Palestinian access to the site. On any given Friday, up to 35,000 Palestinians pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that's according to its director. That number drops to 5,000 when Israel places age restrictions on worshippers. This is the checkpoint many Palestinians in the West Bank use to get to Jerusalem in order to pray at Al-Aqsa. But over the last few weeks, Israeli security forces have been turning away worshippers here. Israel imposes strict restrictions on Palestinians wishing to pray at Al-Aqsa while allowing Jewish groups to tour the compound. Among them are settlers and far-right Jewish activists who say Jews should be allowed to pray here. But Palestinians consider this a provocation and say this is strictly an Islamic site. There are worries that the political conflict between Israelis and Palestinians could turn into a religious one. Nisreen Al-Shamaileh, Al Jazeera, Qalandia checkpoint in the occupied West Bank.
So as we've been hearing there, the Noble Sanctuary or Temple Mount is one of the most contested areas of land in the world. It's a place where some of the most important events in Islam, Judaism and Christianity took place. Now, Muslims believe the 36-acre site is sacred, and for Jews, it's the location of 2 ancient temples now destroyed. It's home to the Dome of the Rock, where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. It's sometimes confused as the mosque, but the mosque itself lies here at the southern end of the compound. Then there's the Western Wall. Now, Jews believe it is the last remnant of an ancient temple, and they come from around the world to pray there. Well, let's get straight into the discussion now. And joining us from Ramallah is Fadi Quran, a senior campaigner for Avaz and a Palestinian community organizer. And in Jerusalem, we have Yishai Fleischer, Director of Programming and a radio personality at the Voice of Israel, East Jerusalem. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us on the show. Now, Fadi Quran, if I could start with you. For those of us who are unfamiliar with the situation on the ground, just explain to us why Israeli authorities would feel the need to restrict access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Well, I think the first thing that we need to keep in mind is that since 1967, Jerusalem, East Jerusalem particularly, has been occupied, and Israel annexed through its internal legal mechanisms the part of Jerusalem in which a majority of Palestinians live. And there's consistently been policies that have been implemented to restrict not only Palestinians from entering the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but generally to diminish the population of Jerusalem from Palestinians. And these policies include house demolitions, they include the expansion of settlements, now they include
how much,
the annexation
Fadi Quran,
wall,
I
as
just
well
want
as
to bring
checkpoints.
the discussion to current situation and the current day. I mean, we could go on and on talking about history. But how much do you think this restriction has to do with the recent Gaza conflict and perhaps Israeli authorities trying to ease tension over those issues?
Well, the first point I need to make is that we can't just look at the situation now without looking at the broader context. Now, the context now, in terms of the increased restrictions, I believe largely have to do with the continuation of Israeli policies, but they've intensified because of openings that have resulted from the internal upheavals within the Arab world, which mean that there's less pressure vis-a-vis Israel on these issues, particularly diplomatic pressure. And the second aspect is the internal shift to the right of the Israeli political system, which has thus led to extremists and fanatics raising through and gaining power within Israel. And actually those leading these processes, those leading the continued incursions into the Al-Aqsa compound have been people from the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And
Right.
of course, this is being allowed because of the political difficulties that the Israeli government is facing after the Gaza war. So they want to gain more support by allowing such actions to take place.
Fadi, if I can just put you on hold there for a while and then go over to Yishay Fleischer. Now, Yishay, Fadi Quran there just described extremists and fanatics who want access to the site. You're one of those people who want access to that site. Would you describe yourself as an extremist, a fanatic?
Well, I extremely love Jerusalem, and I extremely do love the Temple Mount, and our people have used our extreme love for this place to keep it as a focal point of prayer for the last 3,000 years. If you want to talk about extremism and fanaticism, I think your other guest just mentioned that there's an upheaval in the Arab world. There's a jihad throughout the whole Arab world that's being destroyed. And one place of normalcy and normal living for these Arabs that your other guest claims are occupied is in East Jerusalem and on the Temple Mount and in these places. And we are also trying to assert our natural rights to pray on the Temple Mount, our place of connection. Every child in Jerusalem knows that this is a place holy to Jews,
well, you've
to Muslims,
just talked
to Christians.
You've just talked about the upheaval within the Arab world. Don't you think that restricting access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, restricting young Palestinian Muslims from praying at this mosque, of which they've done for decades and decades, don't you think that would just further inflame tensions?
Well, I'm not so concerned about inflaming tension in the Arab world. The one island of normalcy in the Arab world is actually Israel. But we are not restricting people from praying. We're restricting people from being violent and restricting others from praying. And that's why the narrative is so skewed on the kind of jihadist propaganda side, where there's a discussion about limiting Arabs from praying or Muslims from praying, but really it's the Jews who are not allowed to move their lips on the Temple Mount. And this is, of course, in the heart of Jerusalem, which is the capital of Israel, the Jewish state. So I think by restricting criminal activity, we will ensure that everybody gets a chance to pray on the Temple Mount.
Fadi Quran, I want to bring you in. You know, Yishay there does have a point. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site for Muslim. It is the holiest site for Jews. Shouldn't they have just as much access to the site as Muslims?
Well, I think the first point that I want to make on this aspect is that if you read the statements that are made by the communities that are trying to force access onto the Temple Mount, who are led oftentimes by Moshe Feiglin, who's an Israeli Knesset member, they've said clearly that, and he's said clearly that hopefully this is a step in the direction of removing all Muslims from the area. And I believe that's fanaticism. Now, the question here isn't about giving all people access to this site, all people who have holy connections to it. Of course, all of Jerusalem, people deserve to have access to it. I mean, as a Palestinian, I was born in Jerusalem, and I can't access Jerusalem. And millions of Palestinians, actually, from around the world can't access Jerusalem due to Israeli restrictions. Now, if we want to speak from the direction of human rights, from the direction of natural rights, then what we need to keep in mind is that there are three things: freedom, justice, and dignity, that all people deserve. And Jerusalem certainly isn't an oasis, as Mr. Yishai mentioned. In fact, Israel has plans to remove over 12,000 Palestinians living in and around Jerusalem from their places. Tens of thousands have already had their houses demolished and have been forcibly transferred from outside of Jerusalem.
Yishai,
and we've also had the recent war against Palestinians.
Can I just bring Yishai back into the discussion now? Yishai, you can certainly understand the nervousness, the anxiety, the frustration that Palestinians do feel, seeing as settlers are encroaching on their land. Now, if you have Jewish worshippers coming onto the Al-Aqsa site, you can see how that is being perceived as taking that away from Palestinian Muslims and the Muslim world in general.
I think that there's a great neurosis in the Muslim world from losing their feeling that they're the number one superior religion and people. It's true that the Jewish people have come back home to our ancestral homeland. It's true that we are a tiny minority in a broader Arab world. I always like to say that Allah loves the Arabs. He gives them 22 Arab countries with oil coming out of the ground. But there's one tiny piece of land which is called Al-Quds, Jerusalem and Israel, which Allah obviously is giving to the Jewish people, as by the way the Quran mentions will happen as well. And it's happening as we speak. The Jewish people are here. We are succeeding. We want to bring in our Arab minority to live a decent and normal life with normal hospitals, normal jobs, normal flowing water, not a lot of head cutting off jihad, a lot of security. But when we have the jihad trying to infiltrate Israel, we will do what other minorities in the Middle East need to do. We need to arm ourselves and defend ourselves against that kind of criminality.
I want to bring the discussion back to the Temple Mount and to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, many rabbis have ruled that Jews should not walk on the Temple Mount. I can see you nodding there. You yourself are a rabbi. You are aware of this rabbinical law. And according to Israeli law, it is illegal for Jews to pray on the Temple Mount. Why then is there this small group of right-wing Jews who insist on having protection, or who need protection, to get onto this site and break Israeli law and break rabbinical law?
Let me just explain that in truth, Jewish law thinks that the Temple Mount belongs to the Jewish people. Some rabbis are concerned that we may not act in a holy and proper manner if we go up to the Temple Mount without the proper preparations and immersions and all that kind of stuff. But if we were to take Jewish law all the way, then certainly the soccer playing of Arab children on the Temple Mount is also illegal under Jewish law. So I want to tell you that the Jewish people have yearned and will yearn and always yearned for the Temple Mount as a central place for prayer. That's number one. With regard to Israeli law, actually the Supreme Court has said over and over again that Jews should be allowed the right to pray on the Temple Mount. It's actually Waqf law,
but not
Jordanian
as a group,
law, which bars
though.
us from praying.
Only as individuals, but not as a group. Because there is full intention, there is full knowledge that this is such an inflaming situation. Surely you can understand yourself going onto this site that you yourself would be seen as a red flag.
Absolutely. I do think that there are jihadist elements that fear us going up to the Temple Mount. I know that when I move my lips in prayer, that scares the Waqf officials. They think that Allah might hear me.
Fadi Quran, is it fair to say, is it just jihadist elements, or is the Muslim world against Jewish presence in the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Are we just talking about people who have extreme views within the Muslim world? Or are we talking about moderate conservative Muslims who share the same view?
Fawzia, I think we're falling into the mistaken assumption that this issue and this tension around the Temple Mount is religious in nature. Now, there are religious elements and there are politicians that are trying to use these religious elements to inflame the situation and to achieve Israeli political goals. But the fact of the matter is that within the Muslim world, the main reason and within the Arab world. And again, let's not speak within this religious framework, but let's speak within even the broader world. The reason people are criticizing these types of actions and these types of moves are not related to a lack of open-mindedness, and maybe in a small group in which the media often focuses on, you have these extreme right-wing people on both sides who focus on these teensy-weensy religious elements. But the fact of the matter is, the broader issue is, again, Israeli policies in Jerusalem. Now, the people who get angry when Israeli, let's say, settlers and certain politicians come to the Temple Mount are mainly getting angry because it's these same group of people who have taken their land. It's these same politicians who are ordering house demolitions against their houses. And the reason the international community is in uproar about these Israeli policies isn't because the international community prefers Muslims to Jews or vice versa. The main reason is that these policies and those who are implementing them are in violation of basic human values and principles, are in violation of human rights. And I think that, again, it's important to leave this religious element, put it on the side, and don't fall into it, and look at the broader picture.
Yushay, I can see you nodding there. Do you agree that this is beyond a religious issue? This is actually a deep political issue that needs to be addressed, not just by Israel and the Palestinians, but the international community as well?
Fazia, I think that Fadi may be a little bit out of touch. If he thinks that the Temple Mount is not a religious issue, then I don't know, maybe he hasn't been up to the Temple Mount in a while. It is controlled by a religious authority. It is a place of prayer for all kinds of people. It is very much a religious issue. It's the same kind of issue why Jews are not allowed to live in places like Saudi Arabia. It's a religious extremist outlook which doesn't let other people move their lips on the Temple Mount because of what? Because they're afraid of our prayers. It's really a neurosis, a craziness. And it's actually not the way to go. The way to go is to fulfill the prophetic vision that both the prophets of Israel, also in the Christian texts, it says the same thing. This is going to be a house of prayer for all nations.
Yushay, I'm very curious, though. I have to say, I'm very curious that since 1967, you know, there hasn't really been much conflict over the Temple Mount, over Al-Aqsa Mosque. Yes, we've seen 2 intifadas. But I've noticed that over the last 5-6 years or so, there's been a growing number of right-wing Jewish worshippers who are refusing, shall we say, to obey Israeli law and are pushing their way onto the site, this holy site, and they are inflaming tensions between the 2 sides. Explain to us, where is this coming from? Why is there a growing need?
That's a very good question. I think first thing I just want to correct one tiny thing. When people like myself go up on the Temple Mount, we go with Israeli police escort. So it's hard to imagine that that's against Israeli law when the very police is taking us up there and protecting us from jihadists elements up there.
It would suggest that there is a political bent to it, though. If you are being given police protection, there is an awakening. That there is a political bent towards this movement.
There is an awakening. There's an awakening, a renaissance of Jewish connection to Jerusalem. It's true. As the Jewish people are coming back to the land of Israel, as Jerusalem is being built, as prophecies are coming true, you're right, there has been a growth recently. I myself have noticed it. I have friends who have become more part of this movement. It's a movement to reclaim our ancestral rights, our national historic rights in this land, and we are pushing back against elements who deny us. I agree with you, there is an awakening. It's true.
Right. Fadi Quran, I want to bring you in here. You can understand the Israeli government's dilemma here. While they want to try to respect Muslim worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, there is also a need for them to appease a seemingly growing number of right-wing Jewish worshippers.
There is, and again, this is why it's important to know. In most religious conflicts around the world, not just here, when we dig deep on them, we find that people are using certain religious ideologies, certain power plays within these religious ideologies, but in the end to achieve certain political and economic interests. And in the end, that's what Israel is doing. Again, although the policies right now may be getting media attention, for the last 14 years, Palestinians throughout the West Bank have been largely prevented from going to Jerusalem. So the Israeli policy has been consistent. The US and the UN have both stated very clearly that Israeli policies in East Jerusalem are seeking to diminish the non-Jewish, that is Palestinian presence in the city.
Right.
And this is what continues to inflame the problem. Now, the Israeli government may portray itself as being in a dilemma. It's maybe in a dilemma from a tactical perspective. How do we do this as much as possible without getting an international community's uproar? And this is why, Fawziyya, I think it's again important to leave these messianic beliefs about religion and to leave this attempt to cover this issue with the religious umbrella and to look at the core political interests at play. And here the international community has a central role in holding Israel accountable to clear violations of international law.
Fadi, you know, some have actually said that Palestinians themselves have used the Al-Aqsa Mosque as a political hotbed, as a political issue for their own cause.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's going to be true that there are some parts of Palestinian society and some parts of even the Palestinian leadership that are going to use this issue for political gains. I mean, from their perspective, if we just speak about a rational approach, since this issue is so sensitive, since this issue brings international attention, you know, that's why we're talking about the issue right here, they're going to use it to achieve certain political goals. And that actually falls into the argument I'm trying to make, is that the core issue around this is political. Now, there may be religious elements. Clearly, there are religious elements because of the holiness of the place, but these religious elements are simply being abused to achieve political ends.
Now, Yushay Fleischer, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has said that this holy site has been desecrated by settlers, and at the same time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed his warnings of a possible religious war. Do you think there will be a religious war?
I think that there'll always be a threat of war. I think that Israel has survived on its sword because for one reason or another, if it's a political claim that we're somehow suppressing or oppressing Arabs, if it's a religious claim that we're somehow desecrating a religious site, there'll always be a reason to attack tiny Israel with huge jihadist onslaught. They'll always find some kind of either rewrite history, say we were never there. That's the newest effort since the great historian Yasser Arafat rewrote all of history and told us that the Jews were never in Jerusalem, we were never on the Temple Mount. Now the Jerusalem Arabs that I see every single day driving fancy cars, wearing fancy shoes, eating fancy food at the Mamilla Mall in Jerusalem are now, we're being told on this program, that they're oppressed. So there's always this reason and there's always this threat, war, you're going to get war. You know what? How about we give a little bit of war back? We are talking about praying on our ancestral holy spot. That's all we're talking about. We're talking about having the right to pray where we've wanted to pray. Now, there's these elements that don't let you move your lips, don't let you go up. That's exactly what they want to do in Saudi Arabia. That's exactly what they want to do in all these Arab countries where they don't even let Jews come and visit.
We're just running out of time. I do apologize, but I am going to have to go to Fadi now. Fadi, as I mentioned before, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has said that the site has been desecrated by settlers. Benjamin Netanyahu, however, has dismissed warnings that there could be a religious war. Are we about to see a third intifada over the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
Well, I think it's 3 points to focus in on here, Fawziyya. The first point is that when we say there's oppression happening in Jerusalem, we're not basically claiming something. An example as simple as my own sister, who fell in love with a man, a Palestinian from Jerusalem, and got married to him. She's not allowed to live in Jerusalem. And if he comes and lives here in the West Bank for a few years, he'll lose his ability to ever return to Jerusalem due to Israeli policies that seek to ethnically cleanse Jerusalem from Palestinians. And these policies are documented, so I won't go into them, but people can do a simple search on the UN's website. Now, will there be a third intifada because of the situation on the ground? I think that there's a big potential, there's a lot of potential for an uprising to happen here. And I think many people will try to portray it as a religious war. But I think, in fact, it will be a simple war of people who have been oppressed, a simple uprising, acts of civil disobedience by people who've been oppressed for decades and who are seeking freedom, justice, and dignity. And I think that people consistently try to explain the region here in terms of jihadists, the rise of extremism, and so forth. But I think really throughout the Middle East, there are two sides. There's a group of people, the majority, but silent, unfortunately, in the large part, but who are seeking freedom, justice, and dignity for all, who are seeking equality at all levels, who are seeking to live a normal life and pursue happiness.
We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so very much for joining us on the discussion. I'd like to thank our guests, Fadi Quran and Yishai Fleischer. And do please feel free to add your voice to this discussion. You can always leave your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're also on Twitter. Look for us at AJ Inside Story. I'm Fawzia Ibrahim. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.